Hello and welcome to Legalise Vaping by Legalise Vaping Australia. I'm here with the director of the entire enterprise, Brian Marlow. Brian, how are you?
G'day.
All right, well, let's go through a few of the vaping-related stories that we thought were kind of interesting for the week. Our friend Colin Mendelsohn was on an interview, and this was an interview with Triple M, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Triple M. And the interview, the theme of the interview he did was, why is vaping still illegal in Australia? And he had a really nice long-form interview with them where he just kind of explains all the benefits of vaping and why it is that this hasn't become legal yet. And before we're going to play a clip of it, but before we do, I want to say it's always very refreshing when media allows vapers to make their case.
Yeah, especially right now. The media has just been focused on COVID.
Yes.
Like on my Gmail, my promotions inbox, which is all the like companies sending generic shit through MailChimp, it is just email after email on like what they're doing in response to the coronavirus, and it's like, you sell you got my name because I bought something from a fucking health store once.
Yes.
And now you want to send me like kombucha via a drone.
It's something worse. It's something like you got a phone cover. It's like, we're all in this together.
From Coverly.
Yeah, and something. Once you have your income back, maybe you won't forget who your friends are.
Yeah, exactly. We're all in this together. So when this is all over, make sure you buy another cover for your shitty iPhone.
Slightly beside the point.
Look, it's legalized vaping. We go on tangents.
That's true.
It's one of these things like. The media is not really focusing on anything outside of coronavirus, so it's refreshing to see any coverage on vaping that isn't just a pass-away comment that actually unpacks it. So we'll give that a listen now.
His name is Professor Colin Mendelsohn. He's the chairman of an organisation called Tobacco Harm Reduction. Dr. Mendelsohn, thanks for joining us. What does the research say? Is vaping safer than smoking?
Absolutely. I think there's overwhelming scientific agreement that it's far less harmful than smoking. The Royal College of Physicians in the UK reviewed the evidence and they concluded that long-term health risk is unlikely to be more than 5% of the harm from smoking tobacco.
That's good evidence, a lot of people would be happy to hear that. So we know that it's less harmful, but is there actually evidence that it also helps you quit smoking?
Absolutely. Well, it's probably the most effective quitting aid we have. There was a recent randomised controlled trial that found it was twice as effective as nicotine replacement therapy, which is kind of the gold standard that we use. And it's the most popular quitting method as well, which is really important because it's reaching large numbers of the smoking population and having an important effect on public health because of that.
So, like I said, I think it's a good, fair interview that they do, and this reminds me just the comparison of something like this, which is like a 20-minute, 17-minute interview, which is very fair. You hear a lot of Colin, making his case, versus an interview that you guys did sometime back for a television program, where you spent about 4 hours really going through every single part of your argument.
Well, it was more than that. So it was either Sunrise or whatever other stupid morning TV show there is. It's like Sunrise with like Jimmy and like, mornings with Wodjagodge. Jimmy and the Blonde, and then like Koshi and the other guy.
Yeah. And you were right between like making saltwater taffy and that squirrel who can snowboard.
Yeah. Like in terms of like the time slot. So they hit us up and they're like, "Hey, we want to do a really detailed report on vaping. Do you mind if we come around? And can you find a vapor? And can you maybe find a vape shop so they can all say their piece?" I went, "Yeah, no worries." So I found a vape shop. Jay from House of Vape, hope you're listening. G'day, mate. Him and Andrew came all the way out to our office. We lined Kat up, who vapes in our office, sat down and did numerous interviews and numerous takes, got all kinds of B-roll footage, spent about 4 hours doing filming. And then after that, a day later, they called me and said, "Oh, actually, we'd also want to get some footage inside a vape shop. Can we do that?" So then I drove to House of Vape with them. Met them there and did more filming there for what ended up being a 30-second piece.
Yeah.
That only focused on me going, "This is what a vape looks like."
Yeah. You just explained like the difference between like a big vape
and
a small
basically,
vape.
basically, I was like, look, this one's I think I gave a description of how it works.
Yeah, so open pod and
like an open pod and a closed pod, pod system and all that kind of stuff. And then it was like, and that's vaping, and that's like, now to water skiing squirrel.
No, not only that, now to a podiatrist.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
like some
completely
dude who
forgot what a
works on
bullshit story
feet
this was.
Saying it's not safe.
Yeah, so then they're like, oh, we've got to be fair and balanced. So we found an doctor that works on feet who says it's bad for you. And it's like, okay, has he ever done like tobacco treatment? Like, has he treated addiction? Or does he just deal with like people who have athlete's foot?
He's just a very smart guy who happens to kind of carry on the opinion that we here at this show like to propagate.
Convenient.
Yes. So I'm always happy to see this type of media because, once they give us the platform, we win.
Yeah.
All the facts are on our side. Anytime you let us make our case, we end up on top.
Absolutely.
Last point we'll make. A American kid, created for his school.
No, that was the point. Last point we'll make. A kid. Thank you all for listening. It was like this weird, awkward pause. It was like, last point we'll make. A kid.
Anyway.
Sorry, go on.
So, there's a kid in the States who created a vaping detector for his school because he heard about all these things that were happening in the States, that alarmism that happened in the States.
There's always fear-mongering that, if we legalize vaping, that the youths with two Fs will take them up.
Perish. He found a way to detect vapes, and only vapes apparently, not a metal detector, but a vape detector. And he wants to put it in his school, and he wants other schools to adopt it. Now, bear with me, because this might surprise you, but I kind of support this idea. And bear with me, only if all of the data is public. So we have it in all the schools.
I see where you're going with this. Okay.
And we have all those kids walking in and out. And then at the end of the month, it'll be like, okay, there were 2 vapes.
So basically what you're saying is, let's just to really scale it back, what you're saying is, look, if you want to do this, because kids should not be accessing these products.
Correct.
And essentially what you're saying is, if you want to do this, then you need to publish in real time the statistics of the amount of vapes being found.
Correct.
Because what will come out of that is be like, and this week we found 6 count them, 6 vapes. Like in this one school, 6 in total. Like it's
across the country.
Yeah, done. I was skeptical at first.
Yeah.
I was skeptical at first. Done. Let's do it because, to be a bit serious here, anti-vapors say, "Oh, there's a youth epidemic," and they'll go, "In the last 5 years alone, vaping use amongst youth has increased tenfold." It's like, well, yes, because vaping is more it's more of an industry now, and 10 times 4/5 of fuck all is still 4/5 of fuck all.
Over the last 15 years, cell phone use has grown by 300%.
Yeah, over the last 30 years, the use of PlayStation 4 has increased by 1 billion %.
Yeah,
it's like, yes. That's how it works when a new technology hits the market.
Correct.
Now, that's not to undermine the fact that kids should not be accessing vapes. Right. Absolutely. But the response, as I'm sure our listeners will be aware, is, well, imagine if you had a proper risk proportionate regulatory framework. Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And even anti-vapors say, yeah, I agree with that. It's like, yeah. So then in order to get that risk proportionate framework, you need to legislate these products. Oh yeah, we need legislation. Which means you got to legalize it. No, hey, you sound like a crazy man. It's just like...
Exactly.
Fuck, I feel like a mad person sometimes.
All right. Well, what I think we're going to do is we're going to cut it off here. And we're going to go to an interview that you conducted.
That's right. My very first interview where I was doing the interviewing. A little bit awkward. But yeah, we interviewed Dr. Joe Kosterich from ATHRA. He works alongside with Dr. Mendelsohn. Most of our vapors will be acutely aware of the work that ATHRA have done to support the rights of vapors in Australia. We'll cut over to that. It's not going to be the full interview. We'll post the full interview later on. This is just some of the key bits, and we can go from there.
All right.
joining me today is Dr. Joe Kosterich. Most of you in the vaping world will know Joe rather well from his work alongside Dr. Colin Mendelsohn with ATHRA. Joe is also a practicing GP over in Western Australia, and Joe and I have worked together quite closely on numerous vaping issues, and both actually presented at an inquiry over in WA. So, Joe, thanks for joining the podcast.
Oh, lovely to be with you, Brian.
So I guess before we get started, there's a lot of people in the vaping world that will know you all too well, and I'm sure there's people over in Western Australia who've seen you present on the nightly news on a number of issues, not just limited to vaping. But for those who might not be as aware, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and sort of how you got into the vaping world and decided to get involved with ATHRA and help with the push to legalise vaping in Australia?
Look, I'll try and cut a long story short, Brian. I'm a GP and been a GP in Perth for 30-odd years. Look, I've also been involved in a number of different health-related businesses, and I do consultancies to a number of health-related businesses, both in the management and running of medical centres in the medicinal cannabis space with Little Green Pharma, and as you mentioned, do some work in the media with 6PR in Perth and some other channels, and also on TV. Look, the vaping interest, I suppose, was first piqued by patients coming in telling me they'd stopped smoking by using vaping, and I think this goes back 5 or 6 years or so ago. And my initial response was, well, what have you been doing? And they explained it and how it was supported in the UK and other jurisdictions, and it was around that time that there was a case in Perth of a vendor who was fined a significant amount of money by the health department for selling vape products. And I remember having a discussion on air with gentleman Paul Murray, not the guy who's on Sky News, same name, but was running a radio program in Perth. He's former editor of the West Australian newspaper, who'd also researched this a little bit. And I mean, it basically struck me that here is something that reduces harm from smoking, and yet you can go into pretty much any supermarket, any petrol station, any corner store, and if you're over the age of 18, legally buy cigarettes, and really pretty much no questions asked. In fact, no questions asked. And yet here was something which is, far less harmful, which we were making it difficult for people to access. And this just struck me as making no sense. And look, I spoke a little bit about it in the media when asked, wrote some articles on it subsequently in 2018 through, I suppose, Brian, our mutual friend and associate Tim Andrews was introduced to Colin Mendelsohn and Alex Wodak, who are also working in this space. Alex comes from the harm reduction background, Colin really from the tobacco, from the quit smoking background. And I was asked by them would I, come on board with this new organisation they were starting, and that was sort of 2 and a bit years ago now. That was the beginning of ATHRA, and away we went.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly time sort of goes. I mean, when we started out with our campaign in Vape Force One in the bus, that feels like maybe a year ago, but it's 2.5 years ago that we did that. And that's when I first actually met Colin as well. He came out to our campaign launch and sort of went from there. So it's amazing how quickly it progresses. Since then, we've worked pretty closely on numerous issues in the vaping space, including the inquiry into personal choice and community safety, also known as the Nanny State inquiry that was chaired over in WA. Good to see that the final report on that came back in favour of vaping legalisation, or a majority decision, to say the least. That was something that you sort of presented on. Did you find that you got much pushback when you were sort of presenting on that kind of issue? I know that a couple of people on the inquiry were pushing back, but what are some of the sort of obstacles that you guys have faced within ATHRA, or even at a personal level, trying to push for this issue? I assume you probably get painted with you're just a shill for big tobacco brush or something like that.
That's pretty much it. Big tobacco shrill, in the pocket of somebody. You don't know the science. I mean, there's a whole host of abuse that gets thrown at anybody who questions the conventional wisdom. Look, in terms of the parliamentary committee, look, in fairness to them, their job is to ask questions, and arguably maybe not difficult questions, but they don't necessarily know the first thing about it, and their role is to inquire. So, look, I didn't particularly feel that any of the questions asked were, unfair or unreasonable. As you quite rightly say, the majority report supported legalising vaping. The minority, and it does appear to have split a little bit along party lines. The two party members of the committee essentially had a minority view, which is the standard health department line of we need more research and we need a precautionary principle. Vaping's been around since the early 2000s. It was not invented by big tobacco. It is not to big tobacco conspiracy. Yes, tobacco companies have moved into the space because they see their markets are shrinking and they see this is an area where people may be moving to. So that doesn't make it a plot. That just makes it a business decision.
The rest of that interview will be made available soon on iTunes, YouTube, and Facebook. But for now, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.